in the life of the Aurobindo and the mother. Now, I would like to request the facilitator and the key resource person to Diganta Biswa Sarma sir to commence the session and lighten us through his valuable words. Thank you.
Namaskar. So first, a quick recap of yesterday's session. So first point to be noted, and what we had discussed yesterday, that two different consciousnesses in the human being. We have two different consciousness. One outward, in which he ordinarily lives. Then the other inward and concealed, not known to him. Not known to him. The fourth point, the inner consciousness begins to open through sadhana. One is then able to go inside and have all kinds of experiences there. One then begins to live more and more in the inner being, and the outer becomes more and more superficial. The inner consciousness at first seems to be the dream, seems to be the dream. Afterwards, it becomes the reality, and outer is felt as a dream or delusion or as something superficial and external. The inner consciousness begins to be a place, then inner consciousness begins to be a place of peace, light, etc. Outer has to be changed into counterpart and instrument of the inner. The outer also must become a place of peace, light, union, etc. with the divine. The inner nature always is in touch with the divine, whereas the outer, that is to say the mental, vital, and physical, has been brought up in ignorance, and they are full of defects. They are full of defects, imperfections, and impurities. Therefore, outer cannot be changed in a moment. Outer cannot be changed in a moment. The inner experience grows and extends and feels more and more of the nature through sadhana. But till all is filled, the imperfections remain somewhere. Then we discussed about the environmental consciousness. So everyone carries around him an environmental consciousness or atmosphere. You can call it atmosphere around you, or you may call it environmental consciousness. And what we do through this consciousness, through which he is in relation with others, through this environmental consciousness and with the universal forces, through which these forces or thought or feeling of other enter. The feelings, thoughts of other enter into our being. Through what? Through this environmental consciousness. Then we discussed that individual is not limited to his physical body alone. But why we feel like that? Because our external consciousness feels like that. When one gets over this feeling of limitation, then what happens? He first feels the inner consciousness, which is connected with the body but does not belong to the body. It is connected with the body but does not belong to the body. So when one is getting over this feeling of limitation, what happens first? First, he feels the inner consciousness, which is connected with the body but does not belong to it. Then he feels planes of consciousness above the body, planes of consciousness above the body. That is the consciousness of mind, higher mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, over mind. All these classes of minds will be taken up in due course, and also a consciousness surrounding the body. So when he is getting over this feeling of limitation, he feels first inner consciousness, and he feels that inner consciousness is connected with the body, and he also feels that but then this inner consciousness does not belong to the body, though it is connected with the body, but it does not belong to the body. And he also feels plans of consciousness above the body, above the body. And also he feels a consciousness surrounding the body, though it is surrounding the body, but it is part of the individual being. This environmental consciousness is not outside outside the being. It is very much part of the individual being, and through which one is in contact with the cosmic forces and with other beings. This last is the environmental consciousness. So when we do sadhana, when we sadhana means when we are getting over these feelings of limitation. What is that limitation? That we are not limited to the physical body. But why we feel like that? Because our external consciousness feels like that. But when we get over this feeling of limitation, then what happens? Then we feel inner consciousness, followed by plans of consciousness above the body, then a consciousness surrounding my body. Though it is surrounding my body, yet it is part of my being. It is part of my being, and through which one is in contact with the cosmic forces, one is in contact with other beings. And this last is the environmental consciousness according to Sri Aurobindo. So now let us move on to new things. Then each man has his own personal consciousness. We know it. We have all our personal consciousness, and which is entranced in his body, which is entranced. Entranced means our khoponi puti ase, amar jitu ব্যক্তিগত চেতনা, entranced in his body, khoponi puti ase, ekebare সংপৃক্ত হৈ আছে, প্ৰথিত হৈ আছে আমাৰ আমাৰ শৰীৰৰ সৈতে. Each man has his own personal consciousness. And also he gets into touch with his surrounding. So we possess personal consciousness as well as we are in touch with my surrounding. But through what? Through his body and senses and the mind. So we are in touch of my surrounding through what? Through my body, through my body sense. This sense is both sense, this not the sense torgan, but the second sense is implied here, torgan. So only through his body and senses and the mind, amar bod, sense means amar bod, amar শৰীৰ আৰু মনৰ জৰিয়তে আমি we are in touch with our surroundings. But how? Using the senses, আমাৰ ইন্দ্ৰিয়সমূহক ব্যৱহাৰ কৰি. So each man has his own personal consciousness entranced in his body, আমাৰ শৰীৰৰ মাজত প্ৰথিত হৈ আছে, and gets into touch with his surrounding only through his body, senses, and the mind. But how? By using his senses. By using his senses. But yet, all the time, this is the normal thing. This is the normal circumstances. But yet, all the time, universe's forces are pouring into him. It is another fact. Always universal forces are pouring into my being. Always universal forces. Though I have my own personal consciousness, yet universal forces all the time pouring into me, into my being. But I am, but it is not known to me unknowingly. We do not know because we are not conscious of. We are imprisoned in our external consciousness, in our superficial consciousness. We are imprisoned in the vital consciousness. We are imprisoned in the physical consciousness. We are imprisoned even in the mind, mental consciousness. We do not feel our inner consciousness. So we do not know that universal forces are pouring into my being all the time. Universal forces are universal forces are pouring into my being without his knowing, without my knowing. So this is the second point to be noted. Then, but then we are aware of, but then we are aware of my thoughts only. We are aware of my thoughts, feelings, etc. that rise to the surface. যিবোৰ যিবোৰ উপৰিভাগলৈকে উদ্ভাসিত হয় বা উপৰিভাগলৈ উঠি আহে, যিবোৰ আমাৰ চিন্তা, আমাৰ ভাৱনা, আমি সেইবোৰৰ বিষয়ে জানো. What we do not know, that universal forces, বিশ্বজনীন শক্তি, universal forces, বিশ্বজনীন universal forces are pouring into my being without my knowing. I do not know. What I know, I am only aware of my thoughts. I am only aware of my thoughts, feelings, etc. And what thoughts, what feelings that rise to the surface, even which the thought which does not rise to the surface, I am not aware of. I am only aware of my thoughts and feelings that rise to the surface only. And we take this for my own. This is the normal situation. That I have my own personal consciousness entrenched in my body. Each man has his own personal consciousness entrenched in his body and gets into touch with his surrounding. Through what then? Through my mind, through my body, through my senses. Yet, though we do not know, though he does not know, the universal forces are pouring into him without his knowing it. Then he is aware only of his thought. He is only aware of his thoughts, feelings that rise to the surface. And these he takes for his own. আমি নিজৰ বুলি ভাবো সেয়া. But what happens in reality? Thought comes from outside. They come from outside. But we take our thoughts as our own thought. But here Maharishi says, really they come from outside in mind waves. So thought is not generated within. Thought comes from outside. Into what? In mind waves, in vital waves, in waves of feelings and sensation, etc. You have to be conscious of. Then you yourself will feel that thought is not generated within. Thought comes from outside. And which takes particular forms in him. So thoughts come from outside and take a certain form in me. Thought is not generated within. Though what we think, he is aware only of thoughts, feelings, etc. that rise to the surface. Not generated to the surface, that rise to the surface. And these he takes for his own. যিবোৰ চিন্তা আমাৰ বাহ্য আমাৰ বাহ্য চেতনাৰ মাজত ভাহি উঠে বা যিবোৰ উদ্ভাসিত হয় আমি সেইবোৰ নিজৰ চিন্তা নিজৰ ভাৱনা বুলি জানো কিন্তু আচলতে কি কৈছে যে চিন্তা আমাৰ বাহিৰৰ পৰা আহে মোষ্টলি বাহিৰৰ পৰা আহে আৰু আহি আমাৰ নিজৰ সত্তাৰ মাজত এটা ৰূপ গ্ৰহণ কৰে and rise to the surface after they have got insight. So this is what we call our thought, our feeling. Thought comes from outside and rise to the surface after taking a certain form in me. So rising to the surface, thoughts rise to the surface. And when it rise to the surface, after they have got insight from outside, but we do not know it. We do not know it. আমি যেতিয়া চকু ধ্যান কৰাৰ বাবে যেতিয়া প্ৰথম মানুহে ধ্যান কৰিবলৈ বহে বা ধ্যানৰ প্ৰক্ৰিয়াত যেতিয়া মানুহে প্ৰথম উপবিষ্ট হয় নতুন শিকাৰুৱে যেতিয়া আৰম্ভ কৰে আপুনিও আজিৰ পৰা আৰম্ভ কৰিব পাৰে ধ্যান মানে কোনো ধ্যান ইজ নট এথিক্স ধ্যান ইজ নট মৰেলিটি ধ্যান ইজ এটচেট্ৰা আপুনি ৰাতি শুবৰ সময়তো ধ্যান কৰিব পাৰে দুপৰীয়াও কৰিব পাৰে গা ধুব যাওঁতেও কৰিব পাৰে ভাত ৰান্ধি থাকোঁতেও কৰিব পাৰে কোনো নিৰ্দিষ্ট নিয়ম নাই তাৰ ধ্যান মানে হ'ল আপুনি ধ্যানৰ উদ্দেশ্য হ'ল মনটোক নীৰৱ কৰা কিন্তু কোনোবাই দাবী কৰিব পাৰে মোৰ মনটো নীৰৱেই সদায় কিন্তু নীৰৱ হয় নে নহয় কেতিয়া প্ৰমাণ পাম যেতিয়া আমি চকু দুটা মুজো যেতিয়া আমি চকু দুটা আমি মুজো আপুনি এতিয়াও মুজি পেলাই চাব পাৰে এতিয়া আপুনি মেলি থাকোতে মোৰ কথা শুনি আছে ফুল কনসেন্ট্ৰেশন কিন্তু আপুনি চকু দুটা মুজাৰ লগে লগে আপোনাৰ নানান ধৰণৰ কথা মনৰ মাজত আহিব আপুনি জনা নাছিলে বাট মাইন্ড ইজ নট সাইলেন্ট গতিকে ধ্যানৰ মুখ্য উদ্দেশ্য হ'ল মাইন্ড হ্যাজ টু বি সাইলেন্সড why mind needs to be silenced মনক যেতিয়ালৈকে নীৰৱ কৰিব নোৱাৰো তেতিয়ালৈ উচ্চতৰ মনৰ অৱতৰণ নহয় আমি সদায় মনৰ মাজতে ইমপ্ৰিজনড হৈ থাকিব লাগিব আৰু যেতিয়া আমি ধ্যানত প্ৰথম দেখা পাম আমাৰ মনটো নীৰৱ নহয় আমাৰ এই যদি আমেৰিকালৈ মনটো গৈছে এই পাঠশালা স্কুলৰ মোৰ য'ত পঢ়িছিলো অংক মাষ্টৰৰ কথা মনত পৰিছে নহলে হয়তো কোনোবা ৰেষ্টুৰেণ্টত খাবলৈ গৈছিলো এদিন সেই কথা মনত পৰিছে নানান ধৰণৰ কথা তাৰ পিছৰ পৰ্যায়ত আপোনাক হয়তো আপোনাৰ গুৰুৱে ক'ব বোলে তুমি অলপ অবজাৰ্ভ কৰা তোমাৰ যিবোৰ চকু দুটা মুজিলে যিবোৰ তুমি দেখা পাই থাকা মনেৰে তুমি সেইবোৰ অলপ অবজাৰ্ভ কৰাচোন তুমি অবজাৰ্ভ কৰা তেতিয়া আপোনাৰ প্ৰথম আপোনাৰ যিটো ৰিয়েলাইজেশ্যন হ'ব ধাৰি মোৰ গোটেই সত্তাটোৰ চাৰিওফালে কিছুমান থট চিন্তা মোৰ ভিতৰত প্ৰৱেশ কৰিবলৈ একেবাৰে উত্ৰাৱল হৈ আছে আৰু আপুনি সেইবোৰক আপুনি তেতিয়া প্ৰিভেন্ট কৰিব পাৰিব অলপ অবজাৰ্ভ প্ৰথম সোমাব আপুনি নিদিব পাৰিব আৰু কোনবোৰক সোমাব দিব নিদিব ইউ শুড টেক দি ডিসিশন কিন্তু যেতিয়া আমি ধ্যান নকৰো তেতিয়া সব সোমাই যায় ভিতৰত আমাৰ সব সোমাই যায় সেইভাবে শ্ৰী অৰবিন্দই কৈছে yet though we have our own personal consciousness and gets into touch with my surrounding through my body through my senses through my mind yet all the time not once not in an auspicious moment, but all the time. The universal forces are pouring into him without his knowing it. He is aware only of thoughts, feelings, etc. that rise to the surface. This is an important word, rise to the surface, rising to the surface. Thoughts which are rising to the surface, not which are generated inside. And these he takes for his own. But in reality, what happens? Really, they come from outside. Really, they come from outside in mind waves, vital waves, waves of feelings and sensation, etc. Which take particular form in him and rise to the surface after they have got insight. So this is the story of our thought. But then Maharishi says, but they do not get into his body at once. অলপ ষ্টেচনত তেওঁলোকে অলপ জিৰাই এই চিন্তাবোৰ লগে লগেই নাহে, একেবাৰে লগে লগে ভিতৰত সোমাই নাযায়, যদিও অল দি টাইম ইউনিভাৰ্চেল ফৰ্চেছ আৰ পৰিং, কৈছে বাট দে ডু নট গেট ইন টু হিজ বডি এট ওৱান্স। দেন হোৱাট হেপেন্স? ইফ ইট does not get into his body at once, he carries about with him, আমি সেইবোৰ বহন কৰি লৈ ফুৰো আমাৰ এই এনভাইৰনমেণ্টেল কনচিয়াছনেছত, into which they first enter. প্ৰথমতে আমাৰ ক'ত থাকে, ক'ত জমা হৈ থাকে? দিছ ইজ দি ষ্টেচন, দিছ এনভাইৰনমেণ্টেল কনচিয়াছনেছ which is surrounding me. গতিকে ডিৰেক্টলি নোসোমাই, প্ৰথম ফ্ৰম আউটছাইডৰ পৰা আমাৰ চাৰিওফালৰ যিটো এই যে এনভাইৰনমেণ্ট, অৰ্থাৎ আমাৰ যিটো পাৰিপাৰ্শ্বিক চেতনা বা এটমস্ফিয়াৰ, পৰিমণ্ডল, কৈছে হি কেৰিজ about, he carries about. So whatever is getting into his body, he carries about with him. He carries about with him an environmental consciousness. প্ৰথম ফেক্ট হ'ল সেইটো যে we carry an environmental consciousness with me. And into that environmental consciousness, they first enter. They means those things which are trying to enter into my being. They first enter into, first they enter into my environmental consciousness because I carry with me an environmental consciousness. So then Maharishi says, if you can become conscious of this environmental self of yours, if you can become conscious, you will ask me how I can become conscious. There are lots of disciplines in India. So it is not my purpose to explain those processes. You can choose according to your svabhava and sadharma, anyone which suits your svabhava and sadharma. So, but there is a discipline how you can become conscious of your environmental consciousness. As we do become conscious about my inner consciousness, about my plans of consciousness above body. So if you can become conscious of this environmental self of yours, then you can catch the thought, passion, suggestion, or force of illness, or whatever it may be, before it enters. ফিল্ডাৰে যেনেকে কেটছ ধৰে বাউণ্ডাৰী লাইনত যোৱাৰ আগতে, ঠিক সেই ধৰণে আপুনি তাৰ কেটছ, you can catch before it enters into being. But you have to be conscious through sadhana about this environmental consciousness. Then you can catch the thought, passion, suggestion, or force of illness. Even force of illness comes from outside, because the illness is a force. It's a force. It is adverse force. It is a force. A force of illness, or whatever it may be. Anything, whatever it may be. Passion, thought, force of illness, suggestion. Even it could be suggestion. It may not be thought. Eta ingit hobo pare, abhas hobo pare. So before it enters, you can prevent it from entering into you. But what is the condition? You have to become conscious of this environmental consciousness or environmental self of yours through sadhana. And then if things in you are thrown out, then what happens? Suppose you are throwing something out of your body, out of your consciousness, then what happens? আমি এতিয়ালৈকে আমাৰ ভিতৰত যিবোৰ প্ৰৱেশ কৰিব ধৰে, আমি তাৰ বিষয়ে অলপমান কথা পাতিলো, কিন্তু যিবোৰ আমি আমাৰ চেতনাৰ পৰা দলিয়াই পেলাব খোজো, আমাৰ চেতনাৰ পৰা, কৈছে if things in you are thrown out, আপুনি কিবা বস্তু আপোনাৰ পৰা দলিয়াই পেলাব বিচাৰিছে, কৈছে if things in you are thrown out, they often do not go all together. বোলে মানে আজিৰ পৰা মই এই বেয়া চিন্তাটো বাদ দিলো এই বেয়া চিন্তাটো বাদ দিলো it's not that easy it's not that easy it's not that easy why let us explain so if things in you are thrown out they often do not go altogether then what happens ঠিক আহিবৰ সময়ত যিবোৰ চিন্তা ইউনিভাৰ্চেল ফোৰ্স আহিবৰ সময়ত কি হয় এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেছত প্ৰথম সোমায় এন্টাৰ ইনটু এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেস ঠিক আপুনি যেতিয়া দলিয়াই পেলাব খুজিছে দলিয়াই পেলাওঁতেও প্ৰথম গৈ এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেছত জমা হয় কৈছে if things in you are thrown out if things in you are thrown out they often do not go altogether but take refuge in this environmental atmosphere কেতিয়াবা কেতিয়াবা ঘূৰি আহে নে নাহে আমি যদি নাই আজিৰ পৰা মই এইজন মানুহক আৰু বেয়া নাপাওঁ কিন্তু দুদিনমান পিছতে আকৌ বেয়া পোৱা হওঁ আমি বেয়া নাপাওঁ বুলি প্ৰতিজ্ঞা কৰিলো আমি থ্ৰ কৰি দিলো আমি বাদ দি দিলো সেইটো কনসিয়াসনেস আমাৰ পৰা গুচি যোৱা নাই প্ৰথমতে যেনেকে আজিকালি মোবাইলত যেনেকে এই কি থাকে আপোনাৰ ডিলিট নহয় প্ৰথমতে যেনেকে ৰিসাইকেল বিনত নে মানে কি কয় এই তাতে যায় আপোনাৰ ফেসবুকত যিবোৰ আপুনি ডিলিট কৰিলে ঠিক তেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ কথা যে প্ৰথমতে কিছুদিন তাতে জমা থাকে আপোনাৰ প্ৰথম আপোনাৰ কিছুদিন জমা থাকে যে রিসাইকেল বিনত গৈ জমা থাকে আহিবৰ সময়তো ডাইৰেক্ট নোসোমাই প্ৰথমতে এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেছত অলপ যেন ৰেষ্ট লয় কৈছে if things in you are thrown out they often do not go altogether but take refuge in this environmental atmosphere and from there try to get in again try কৰি থাকিব আপুনি যেটো বস্তু যে নাই আজিৰ পৰা মই মদ নাখাওঁ আজিৰ পৰা মই চুৰ নকৰো আজিৰ পৰা মই লোভ নকৰো আজিৰ পৰা মই অমুক বস্তুটো বাদ দিম এটো অলপ দিন পিছতে আকৌ সোমাবলৈ বিচাৰে বিশ্বামিত্ৰৰ ক্ষেত্ৰটো একে হোৱা নাছিল জানো ইমান তপস্যা কৰিছে আকৌ তাৰ পিছত কেনেকৈ আহে যদি একেবাৰে ওলাই গুছি গলেতো আহাৰ কথাই নাছিলে this is and from there try to get in again from there means from environmental consciousness or environmental atmosphere and from there try to get in again from there try to get in again and they go to a distance outside but linger on the outskirts outskirtsত lingering কৰি থাকে দীৰ্ঘদিন থাকে they go to a distance outside আনকি এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেছৰ পিছতো কৈছে or they go to a distance either তেওঁলোকে সেই এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেছত থাকে আৰু থাকি তাৰ পৰা trying to get in again or they go to a distance outside বহুত দূৰলৈ যাব পাৰে but linger on the outskirts or even perhaps far off waiting till they get an opportunity to attempt entrance ইমান সহজতে নোহোৱা হৈ না যায় lots of sadhana will be required you need aspiration you need rejection your external consciousness has to be changed has to be transformed into inner consciousness আৰু সেই কাৰণে আমি যে কেতিয়াবা কওঁ অমুক মানুহ ইমান PhD ললে অমুক ললে তাৰ পিছতো তেওঁৰ অমুক ঘটনা ঘটিছে 20 বছৰ 25 বছৰ মানুহজন সদ হৈ আছে হঠাৎ এদিন আমি আন ধৰণৰ কথা শুনিলো সেইবোৰ কিয় হয় আমি যদি এই অলপ যদি আমাৰ সেলফ নলেজ যদি জানিলো হেতেন কৈছে they take refuge in his environmental atmosphere and from there try to get in again আৰু কেতিয়াবা যদি এনভাইৰনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেছৰ পৰা they go to a distance outside but linger on the outskirts even perhaps far off আনকি বহু দূৰলৈকেও যাব পাৰে এটো কৈছে waiting till they get an opportunity to attempt entrance opportunity বিচাৰি থাকিব আমি সাধাৰণতে আমি আমাৰ ট্ৰান্সফৰমেশ্যন, পাৰ্মানেণ্ট ট্ৰান্সফৰমেশ্যনৰ there are stages. First is becoming conscious of my lower nature. Then I must have the aspiration to control those lower vibrations. Then I have to reject. Then only transformation process takes place. So sadhana is a very long process, But attempt is very important. Attempt is always greater than success. Putting effort and attempt are more important. So then, how can we can 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 environmental consciousness become silent? Yes, we can make it silent. We say it can become silent when there is whiteness. When there is whiteness, the simple answer. My consciousness has to be expanded. And when my consciousness will be expanded, when you will rise above mind to what? To higher mind, then to illumined mind, then to intuitive mind, then to overmind. Then your consciousness will be automatically, you will possess a wide consciousness. Now we are possessing a very narrow consciousness, which is called ego consciousness, separative consciousness, because my consciousness is right now imprisoned in desires, in ego. So one can become conscious of it and deal with what passes through it. You can deal with it. You can control your environmental consciousness. But the condition is when there is the wideness of your consciousness. You have to enlarge your consciousness. And then you can deal with what passes through it. A man without it, because this environmental consciousness is a necessity, because there is a necessity. The question is, I have to be capable of dealing with. We need the environmental consciousness need not to be annihilated. It is to be appropriately dealt with, because a man without it means a man without this environmental consciousness would be without contact with the rest of the world. So we need environmental consciousness if we want to keep our contact with the external world intact. So then yesterday we did discuss about vital. I think we do not need to recap again. We have enough discussion. We had enough discussion yesterday. So now, what is the status of my outer consciousness? As we are discussing two kinds of consciousness, outer as well as inner consciousness. As I have been repeatedly saying that my external consciousness is set up. It is imprisoned. It is narrow. And here Maharishi says that the outer consciousness is set up. আবদ্ধ হয়ে থাকে কোট আবদ্ধ হয়ে থাকে because the outer consciousness is set up in the body limitation, this outward consciousness, that is to say our mental consciousness, vital consciousness, physical consciousness. So the outer consciousness is set up in the body limitation, and a little bit and in the little bit of personal mind and sense dependent on the body. So, this outer consciousness is set up in the body limitation, in the little bit of personal mind, in the sense, what type of mind, what type of sense, which are dependent on the body. So we will be discussing. There is a mind called physical mind. As we did discuss about submental consciousness. One is subconscient and one is submental. Subconsciousness is a different range, different plan, while submental is just inferior consciousness than mind, submental. And physical consciousness, physical mind is a submental consciousness. Vital mind is a submental consciousness. All those mind, as we have mind above, as we have higher minds, illumine mind, intuitive mind, over mind above surface mind. Likewise, we have submental minds. That is to say, physical mind, vital mind. All those things will be taken up. So the outer consciousness is set up in the body limitation and in the little bit of personal mind and sense dependent on the body. So this is the first point to be noted with regard to outer consciousness, that it is set up in the body limitation, set up in the little bit of personal mind, set up in the sense. But what type of mind and sense? Which are dependent on the body. So this is the second point to be noted. And the third point, out, outer consciousness sees only the outward. Outer consciousness cannot see except outward, sees only things. অকল বস্তুক দেখা পায়, অকল বস্তুক দেখা পায়, outer consciousness. In contrast to outer consciousness, the inner consciousness can see behind the thing. What lies behind the thing, inner consciousness can see. But outer consciousness cannot see. In a sense, we are blind. Outer consciousness is a blind consciousness. Because through outer consciousness, we can see only things. When you will realizing, or when inner consciousness will grow, then you can see behind things behind. Now with outer consciousness, we cannot see behind the thing. We only see the things. It is aware of the play of forces. Inner consciousness is aware of the play of forces, but outer consciousness is not aware of the play of forces. We are just a little bit superior than animal, as animals are not conscious about anything, what is happening around him, as animal does not know anything. With outer consciousness, it is not that we know many things. Our position is slightly better than animal, slightly better than, but still we are handicapped. So, but the inner consciousness can see behind the thing. Inner consciousness is aware of the play of forces. Play of forces in respect of what? Personal as well as universal. When you will be realizing inner consciousness, your own inner consciousness, then you will be aware of the forces forces of your own being. You will be aware of the play of forces. You will be aware of the universal play of forces as well as personal play of forces. Both. Why? Why? Why inner consciousness is capable of doing all these things and why outer consciousness is not capable of? Because inner consciousness is in conscious touch with the universal action. Outer consciousness has no contact. Outer consciousness is not in touch with the universal action. Why? Because it is shut up. It is a prisoner. My outer consciousness is a sort of prisoner. It is shut up. It is shut up in the body limitation. So we cannot see beyond my body, beyond my body, beyond my mind and senses dependent on my body. But inner consciousness is truly free. Inner consciousness is not shut up. And that is why inner consciousness is in constant touch with the universal action. Outer consciousness is handicapped like animal subconscious. But the inner consciousness is in conscious touch with the universal action. That is why in inner consciousness is aware of the play of forces, both play of forces, personal play of forces as well as universal play of forces. Right now we are almost victim of play of forces. We do not know, we cannot control the play of forces because we are not aware of, because we are shut up in our outer consciousness, and outer consciousness is shut up in body limitation. But then something about our inner parts. Inner parts, though inner parts means inner mind, inner vital, subtle body. Things will be discussed. We have a subtle body too. We have a subtle body too. We have a subtle body. Beyond this gross body, এই স্থূল যিটো আমাৰ শৰীৰ, এই স্থূল শৰীৰৰ উপৰি আমাৰ এটা সূক্ষ্ম শৰীৰো আছে। যেনেকৈ আমাৰ এটা আন্তৰ মন আছে, যেনেকৈ এটা আন্তৰ প্ৰাণ আছে। These are called our inner parts. Those things will be taken up. But few things about these inner parts. That the inner parts in everybody remain vulgar or become high. কথা হৈছে আমাৰ ইনাৰ মন, ইনাৰ ভাইটেল, ইট কেন ৰিমেইন ভলগাৰ, স্থূল হৈও থাকিব পাৰে আৰু সি একেবাৰে উচ্চ হ'বও পাৰে, ডিপেণ্ডিং অন certain things. Because according as they are turned to the outward forces of the ignorance, if my inner parts are turned to the outward forces of the ignorance, then what will happen, you know? It will remain vulgar. If they turn towards the higher forces from above, it will become high. It will remain high. If they turn towards the inner impulsion of the psychic means your antaratma. For right now, you can understand it as your inner soul, antaratma, or your individual soul. Psychic means your individual soul. It's specific to you only. Jivatma is not specific to you only. Those things will be taken up. Jivatma is Jivatma. There is one Jivatma which is in all bhut. As Krishna says, Ishvara sarva bhutanang hriddese arjuna tisthati. And who is humanity? My portion eternal. Mama eva angsha sanatana. This Amsa Sanatana is called Jivatma. And this Jivatma is in everybody, is in every being. It is also in my being. But my psychic being is my personal soul. It is the deputy of the Jivatma. Those things will be taken up. Right now, you can understand as psychic beings. In Assamese, it is called, in Indian language, it is called Satyapurus. Psychic beings means Satyapurus. Satyapurus means your Antaratma, your individual Antaratma, which is not, which has no relation with the psychic being of others. It is my purely personal individual soul. But it is a divine portion. Those things will be taken up. But so, if my inner parts are turned towards the higher forces from above, or if my inner parts are turned towards impulsion, to inner impulsion of the psychic, then what will happen? Then my inner parts will remain high. But if my inner parts, that is to say, my inner mind, inner vital, are turned to the outward forces of the ignorance, then it will remain vulgar. Why? Because all forces can play here. It is not that inner is automatically immune from all perfection, of all imperfection, because all forces can play here also. It is the outer being that is fixed in a certain character, certain tendencies, certain movements. Only the characters of outer consciousness or outer being, tendencies of the outer being, or the movements of outer being, outer consciousness are fixed. Fixed. So outer consciousness is fixed in a certain character, fixed in a certain tendencies, certain movements. Unlike external parts, inner parts, inner parts remain vulgar or become high according as they are turned to the outward forces of the sense, or towards the higher forces from above and the inner impulsion of the psyche. All forces play here. Here means inner. So we have to be conscious of that thing. But the outer being is fixed. Fixed in what? Fixed in a certain character, certain tendencies, certain movements. And there is another character. There is another character of the outer consciousness is not connected with the inner being. This is another character. It is not connected with the inner being. Outer is outer has absolutely no connection with my inner being, though we claim sometimes. The outer consciousness is that which usually expresses itself in ordinary life. So how outer consciousness can be defined? The consciousness which usually expresses itself in ordinary life, it is called outer consciousness. What is this? It is the external mental, external vital, external physical. Why it is called external physical, external mental, external vital? Because we have our inner vital, because we have our inner mind, we have our inner physical, that is to say, subtle body, and it is not connected very much with the inner being. It is not connected very much with the inner being, except in a few who are more conscious in respect of those, even without realizing inner consciousness directly. Their outer consciousness may be connected to a certain extent. So it is not connected very much with the inner being, except in a few, except in a few. Until until when? Until one connects them together. until one connects them together in the course of the sadhana. So through sadhana, you can connect your outer consciousness with the inner consciousness. Then what will happen? Your outer consciousness will be transformed. Your outer consciousness will be changed into what? Into counterparts and instruments of your inner consciousness. So in the next week, today I wanted to discuss about consciousness and force or energy. Chetana aru shaktir majot ki sambandha. Ami koisu all forces are conscious. Maharishi says all forces are conscious. But then why then there are two words, consciousness and force? We could have used interchangeably, but still there are two words. And when we were discussing the definition of consciousness, how we discussed it, that consciousness is awareness. Consciousness is also power of awareness. Consciousness is a dynamic energy. Consciousness is also a creative energy. We have also discussed as dynamic and creative energy are there in consciousness. But that does not mean consciousness and energy are same thing. Though all forces are conscious, energy is there in consciousness, even creative energy is in consciousness, dynamic energy is in consciousness, still consciousness and an energy are not identical. So I wanted to take up this today, but it will not be possible. So let me allow to conclude here today. We will be taking up this consciousness and force or energy in our next session. Till then, let me allow. And if you want to interact, we can interact for a few minutes. Thank you. Any queries you can ask. So this environmental consciousness is a very, I think it's a very, it should be a very revealing discovery for all of you, environmental consciousness.
দিগন্তদা,
Yes.
এনভাইৰনমেণ্টেল কনচিয়াছনেছ মানে পাৰিপাৰ্শ্বিকতা
Yes.
পৰিৱেশ
পাৰিপাৰ্শ্বিকতাটো বুজাইছে, পাৰিপাৰ্শ্বিকতাটোকে বুজাইছে, but it is specific to you.
আচ্ছা
মোৰ এনভাইৰনমেন্টেল কনচিয়াছনেছ বেলেগ, আপোনাৰ এনভাইৰনমেন্টেল কনচিয়াছনেছ বেলেগ। গতিকে এইটো এজ এ হোল, সেইভাবে আমি কালি এটা লাইন ইয়াতে কৈ দিছিলো, ইয়াতে মই লাইনটো আকৌ লেট মি ৰিপিট। মহৰ্ষিয়ে সেইকাৰণে প্ৰথমতে কৈছে, দি এনভাইৰনমেন্টেল ইজ নট এ ৱৰ্ল্ড, ইট ইজ এন ইণ্ডিভিজুৱেল থিং। My environmental consciousness is specific to me. আপোনাৰ পাৰিপাৰ্শ্বিক যিটো ইয়াত তাক ঠিক অসমীয়া কৰিলে কি হ'ব, মই অলপ যদি অসমীয়া শব্দ এটা যদি পাওঁ, অসমীয়া শব্দ কৈছে, অসমীয়া শব্দ এনভাইৰনমেন্টেল consciousness, পাৰিপাৰ্শ্বিক চেতনা বা আপুনি পৰিমণ্ডল বুলি ক'ব পাৰে, এটমস্ফিয়াৰ। আপোনাৰ পৰিমণ্ডল আৰু মোৰ পৰিমণ্ডল একে নহয়। আপোনাৰ পৰিমণ্ডল আপুনি গঢ়ি তুলিছে, মোৰ পৰিমণ্ডল মই গঢ়ি তুলিছো, সকলোৰে পৰিমণ্ডল পৃথক পৃথক। যদি একে হ'লহেঁতেন তেনেহ'লেতো আমিতো সকলোৰে আমাৰ বিহেভিয়াৰ বিলাক একে হ'লহেঁতেন, আমাৰ আচৰণবোৰ আমাৰ একে হ'লহেঁতেন। বুজি পাইছে এতিয়া যিটো সুধিব বিচাৰিছিল আপুনি?
বুজি পাইছো, ঠিক আছে।
দাদা, তাৰ মানে এনেকুৱা নেকি ঘটনাটো যে কিবা এটা ইনসিডেন্ট কিবা এটা কথা আপোনাক যেনেকে টাচ কৰিব মোক বেলেগকে টাচ কৰিব
এইটো হয় পৰীক্ষাত 5000 লৰাই পৰীক্ষাত ফেল কৰে তাৰে দুজনে সুইসাইড কৰে
ইটো কি এনভায়রনমেন্টাল কনসিয়াসনেসৰ
yes environmental because consciousness is specific to you সেইভাবে তো কৈছো যে আমি rationally আমি every individual has to be taken individually কিছুমান কথা একে ধৰণৰ থাকিব পাৰে কিন্তু নহলে সাধাৰণ কথা আজি 10000 চাকৰি নোপোৱা লৰা আছে প্ৰত্যেকজন চাকৰি নোপোৱা লৰাৰ কনসিয়াসনেস জানো একে কোনোবা জংগলত গৈছে বিপ্লবী হৈছে কোনোবাই চাকৰি পোৱা নাই I will be creator of job I will not become job seeker I will be a job creator তেনেকুৱা চেতনা লৈছে কাৰোবাক কোনোবা ইন্টাৰভিউত উপযুক্ত হোৱাৰ পিছত ৰিজেক্ট কৰিছে কাৰোবাৰ বাবে ৰিজেকশনটো আশীৰ্বাদ হৈছে লাইক ভূপেন হাজৰিকা বহুত সময়ত আৰু পৃথিৱীত চাব যিবিলাক সাকসেসফুল মানুহ তেওঁলোক at one point of time rejected হৈছিল গতিকে আজি বিবেকানন্দ বিদেশৰ পৰা ঘূৰি অহাৰ পিছত he was not allowed to enter দক্ষিণেশ্বৰ টেম্পল do you know আপুনি জানেনে বাৰু বিবেকানন্দ বিদেশৰ পৰা অহাৰ পিছত
নাই জানা নাছিলো
he was not allowed to enter by his own guru bhai আজি যদি আপোনাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত মোৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত যদি বলে মোৰ স্কুলখনত সোমাব নিদিয়ে মই কিদিনাই সেন্টিমেন্টাল হৈ সুইসাইড কৰি দিব পাৰো হয়নে নহয় গতিকে my consciousness is my consciousness তাৰ যেটো as a whole consciousness to one item কিন্তু প্ৰত্যেকৰে ক্ষেত্ৰত কাৰোবাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত consciousness is set up in vital কাৰোবাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত set up in mind কাৰোবাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত set up in physical আমাৰ প্ৰকৃতি আমাৰ গুণ আছে আমাৰ সকলোবোৰ বেলেগ বেলেগ so there cannot be uniform civil code in all respect uniform civil code is fine in social formula but there cannot be uniform civil code মানে so far is the psychology is concerned আমি সেইভাবে শিক্ষাটো আসলতে আমি শিক্ষাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰটো each child needs to be taken individually
all are unique
all are not unique all are unique yes all are not uniform all are not uniform all are unique all are unique
ঠিক
আৰু সুধিব কোনোবাই
থ্যাংক ইউ ৰিগন্ত দা
হয় কনসিয়াসনেসটো একেই কিন্তু আমাৰ প্ৰত্যেকৰে ভিতৰত কনসিয়াসনেসটো মই এটা সৰু উদাহৰণ দিওঁ আমি একেটা কোম্পানীৰে সাপোজ আমি ফ্ৰিজ কিনিছো 50000 মানুহে একেদিনাই কিনিছো কিন্তু এই 50000 মানুহৰ ঘৰত ফ্ৰিজটো কিন্তু একে কন্ডিশনত নাথাকে কিন্তু সেম কোম্পানীৰ সেম ডে সেম কোম্পানী সেম প্ৰাইসত ধৰি ললো একেলগে 50000 মানুহৰ ঘৰত পাৰ্টিকুলাৰ কোম্পানীৰ এটা ফ্ৰিজ একে সময়ত গৈছে গতিকে স্বৰূপটো একেই কিন্তু প্ৰত্যেকৰে তাতটো বেলেগ বেলেগ হৈ যায় কোনোবাই ড্ৰয়িং ৰুমত ৰাখিব কোনোবাই পাকঘৰত ৰাখিব কোনোবাই বেলেগ ৰুমত ৰাখিব কোনোবাই তাত মাংস ৰাখিব কোনোবাই তাত ভেজিটেবল ৰাখিব কোনোবাই বা অকল জুস ৰাখিব গতিকে সকলোৰে ক্ষেত্ৰত পৃথক পৃথক হৈ যায়
ডাইনামিক
হয়
ডাইনামিক এনাৰ্জি আৰু ক্ৰিয়েটিভ এনাৰ্জি পিছত ক'ব নেকি অলপ কৈছিল
নহয় আমি কৈছো চেতনাৰ নহয় আমি ইয়াৰ পিছত কম চেতনা আৰু শক্তিৰ মাজত সম্বন্ধটো কি এনেই কোৱা হয় চেতনাৰ মাজত শক্তি আছে তেনেহ'লে চেতনা আৰু শক্তি একে বস্তু নেকি? গতিকে সেই বিষয়টো আমি আলোচনা কৰিম। চেতনা আৰু শক্তি একে বস্তু নে দুয়োটা পৃথক পৃথক বস্তু? কিন্তু চেতনাৰ মাজত দুয়োটা বস্তুই থাকে। চেতনা মানে হ'ল এৱেৰনেছ, চেতনা মানে হ'ল সচেতনতা, এৱেৰনেছ। ইংৰাজীত ক'লে বুজিবৰ কাৰণে বেছি সহজ। কনচিয়াছনেছ is composed of two things, two elements. One is energy and the other one is awareness. কিন্তু সেই বুলি awareness আৰু energy দুটা পৃথক পৃথক বস্তু নে একেই বস্তু, সেই বিষয়টো আমি অহা সপ্তাহত will take up.
ঠিক আছে।
Sarma, we may perhaps conclude. Vaishali, yes, we may conclude.
Okay, sir. It is an honor to have the opportunity to express my appreciation to all the dignitaries present here. I am grateful to the esteemed delegates of the webinar for their presence and efforts in making today's session a success. I extend my sincere thanks to our honored resource person, Shri Diganta Biswa Sarma, sir, for your words of inspiration and encouragement. Your words are greatly appreciated. My gratitude also goes to the director, coordinator, joint coordinator, and to the technical team members of the Capacity Building Center of Cotton University. Lastly, thanks to everyone who attended today's session and would like to hope for such further sessions future. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, and namaskar and good night to all.
Thank you. Thank you and namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you.